Picture the American farm for a second, just in your head. You
Yeah.
know the exact image I'm talking about. You've seen it in like 1,000 truck commercials or political campaign ads.
Oh, yeah, grocery store aisles, too.
Exactly. It's those amber waves of grain stretching out to the horizon, a massive green tractor kicking up dust, and right in the center of it all, you have the rugged, independent farmer.
Yeah, it's a very resilient piece of Americana.
It really is.
It feels timeless,
Uh-huh.
almost mythic. And it's deeply rooted in this idea of complete self-reliance.
Right. But today, we are going to look past that pastoral marketing. We're doing a deep dive into a really fascinating set of source documents today.
Hmm.
They're anchored by a piece titled The Monopolization of the Seed. And, well, the core thesis here completely dismantles that romantic image of the farm.
It really does. It's a completely different reality on the ground.
Yeah, we're looking at how the modern farm has been quietly redesigned into something that operates a lot more like a corporate operating system.
That's a great way to put it.
The mission of this deep dive is to explore how the absolute smallest, most fundamental object in our food system, the seed, became ground zero for intellectual property law,
Right.
and how biological life was transformed into, like, a restricted, licensed corporate asset.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we think of farming as a partnership with nature, but the source describes it more like a software subscription model, where the farmer never actually owns the biological code they are using.
Yeah, that software analogy is spot on, and I think it's important to clarify right at the top what this analysis is actually about.
Right, because it's not what people usually think.
Exactly. When people hear about genetic engineering or corporate agriculture, the conversation usually defaults to the science.
Like, are GMOs safe to eat?
Right, or do they produce higher yields, or what's their impact on local ecosystems? But we aren't really looking at the biological science today. We are looking at the legal architecture.
Hmm.
The source material argues that the real American blind spot here is the ownership structure built around these genetics. Because we aren't just talking about buying a product anymore.
No, not at all.
To really grasp how massive of a paradigm shift this is, we have to kind of contrast it with how farming worked for, thousands of years before intellectual property lawyers entered the picture.
For sure. I mean, historically, the seed wasn't merely a commodity you purchased off a shelf. The source text beautifully describes the historical seed as memory.
Memory. I love that phrasing.
It's powerful, right? It was a living biological archive. A farmer saving seed from one harvest to plant the following spring was relying on genetic continuity.
Right.
That seed carried the physical memory of surviving a drought the previous summer or adapting to the specific soil microbiome on that exact piece of land.
So it was this hyper-localized evolutionary process completely managed by the farmer.
Exactly. You
Right.
plant, the earth grows the crop, you select the hardiest seeds from the yield, and then you just start again.
It's a circular economy. It
Yeah.
literally predates the concept of money.
It does. It was the biological foundation of agrarian independence. The text frames traditional seed saving as civilization's oldest implicit contract with nature.
Oh.
But that thousands of years old cycle fractures the moment seeds become patentable.
Right, when the lawyers get involved.
Yeah. When the legal system decides that a genetic sequence inserted into a plant can be treated as intellectual property, you usher the farmer into a totally unprecedented legal universe.
Because suddenly, the physical crop growing in the dirt of a farmer's field contains proprietary technology,
Legally owned by a multinational corporation.
which fundamentally rewrites the business model of nature. I mean, it's as if you bought an apple at the grocery store, but when you tried to plant the seeds inside it to grow your own tree, you were hit with a lawsuit for copyright infringement.
That is exactly what it's like.
So how did this actually change the day-to-day reality on the ground? Because in the historical circular economy, a seed company can really only sell a seed to a farmer once.
Maybe twice if they want a specific new variety.
Right, because after that, the farmer just propagates it themselves.
But when you wrap a seed in a patent and you legally prohibit the farmer from saving it, you've artificially created a linear economy. You've guaranteed recurring annual revenue.
It's almost like DRM, digital rights management, but applied to a living organism.
What's fascinating here is the genius of this financial colonization. It didn't require force or soldiers or, seizing land.
It just required paperwork.
Exactly. It only required contracts and technology agreements. When a farmer purchases these patented seeds, they are signing a contract explicitly agreeing not to save any of the harvested crop for replanting.
They actually agree to let the seed company audit their fields, right?
Yes, they agree to allow the company to review their farming records. There are even tip lines where neighbors can report farmers they suspect of secretly saving patented seeds.
Wow, so it's a highly monitored relationship.
Very much so. It's a relationship of strict permission.
But this naturally leads to a massive contradiction that we need to talk about. We've established that farmers pride themselves on independence.
Right?
So why on earth would millions of fiercely independent business owners voluntarily sign away their traditional rights? Like, why agree to field audits and lock yourself into an annual subscription model for your most basic input?
That seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah, if the contracts are this restrictive, why adopt the system at all?
To understand that, you have to look at the brutal underlying math of rural economics. American farmers operate in a system designed to squeeze them from both sides.
How so?
Well, the source highlights this economic paradox. Farmers have to buy their inputs, their seeds, fertilizers, heavy machinery, from highly concentrated retail industries.
Okay.
But they have to sell their harvested crops into highly concentrated wholesale industries.
So they pay retail prices to operate, but take wholesale prices for their labor.
Exactly. All while shouldering 100% of the environmental risk.
The weather, the floods, a sudden freeze, the farmer absorbs all of that liability.
Right, so they are operating on razor-thin margins, constantly looking for a way to manage risk. And that's where the specific mechanics of these patented seeds become really important.
Because we aren't just talking about a seed that grows a slightly bigger tomato, right?
No. The breakthrough technology that drove this adoption was herbicide tolerance. That's a crucial mechanical distinction.
Okay, break that down for us.
These genetically engineered seeds were essentially introduced as hardware platforms designed to run a very specific chemical software.
The classic example is Roundup Ready crops.
Exactly. The seed company genetically altered the crop's DNA, so it possessed a synthetic enzyme that made it immune to glyphosate, which is a broad-spectrum herbicide.
Which completely revolutionized the physical labor of farming.
It really did.
Before this, weed control meant tilling the soil, careful crop rotation, or selectively applying different chemicals that wouldn't harm the specific crop you're growing.
It was incredibly labor-intensive.
But with herbicide-tolerant seeds, a farmer could plant a massive field, wait for the crop and the weeds to emerge, and then just broadcast spray the entire field with one chemical.
The weeds die, and the patented crop survives. The convenience was undeniable.
So we can't just call the farmers naive here.
Not at all.
I think that's a trap a lot of people fall into when looking at agricultural consolidation from the outside. They assume the farmers were just duped by slick corporate marketing.
Right, but you look at the mechanics, and you realize they were making highly rational, calculated business decisions based on survival.
If your neighbor adopts a tech that gives them an edge, you have to adopt it too, or you go under. If you don't, you simply can't compete on price.
And that rational choice is precisely how dependency scales across an entire industry. The source stresses that this system spread through necessity, not coercion.
Necessity.
Yeah. And once a critical mass of farmers adopts the proprietary system, the infrastructure around them shifts. Grain elevators, agricultural lenders, local seed dealers, they all begin to normalize this specific technological package.
So if a farmer wants a loan for the season, the bank wants to see that they are mitigating risk by using the industry standard seed.
Exactly. Eventually, opting out of the patented system isn't just difficult, it becomes financially and logistically nearly impossible.
So the farmer gets locked in by economic necessity. But there's a missing piece here regarding how bulletproof these contracts really are. Because biological organisms naturally multiply, it's what they do. So what happens when a farmer decides to challenge this legal boundary? How did the legal system actually finalize this corporate control over natural reproduction?
That brings us to one of the most consequential legal battles in modern agricultural history. It's a Supreme Court case called Bowman v. Monsanto.
Okay.
This case perfectly illustrates the mechanics of how intellectual property law enforces the biological boundary. Vernon Bowman was an Indiana farmer who tried to find a clever legal loophole in the system.
Because Bowman didn't actually violate the direct technology agreement he signed for his main crop, did he?
No, he played by the rules for his primary planting season. He bought the expensive patented seeds, signed the agreement, grew the crop, and sold it.
Right.
But Bowman also planted a secondary late-season crop, where the financial risks were higher, and he didn't want to pay top dollar for premium seeds.
Makes sense.
So instead of buying from the seed company, Bowman went to a local grain elevator.
And a grain elevator is basically a massive storage facility where farmers dump their harvested commodity grain, right?
Yeah, to be sold for animal feed or industrial use, it's just a giant mix of whatever everyone in the county grew that year.
So Bowman bought a load of this cheap commodity grain.
He did, and he knew that because the vast majority of local farmers were using the patented herbicide-tolerant seeds, this generic mix was highly likely to contain the patented genetics.
That's smart.
Yeah, so he planted this cheap grain, and then he sprayed the field with the herbicide.
Which is brilliant in a rebellious sort of way. He used the chemical as a filter.
Exactly. Any plant that didn't have the patented genetic trait died.
And the ones that survived were the genetically modified plants. He harvested those survivors, and then he saved those seeds for his next planting.
He essentially isolated the patented technology out of the generic commodity stream.
Wow.
When he was sued for patent infringement, Bowman used a defense based on a well-established legal principle called the doctrine of patent exhaustion, or the first sale doctrine.
What does that mean exactly?
Generally, this rule means that once a company sells a patented item, they lose the right to control what the buyer does with that specific item.
So if I buy a patented chair, I can resell it or break it.
You can burn it, you can do whatever you want with it. The patent holder's control is exhausted after that first sale.
Okay.
Bowman argued that because the seed company had already sold the original seeds to the local farmers, who then sold the resulting grain to the elevator, the patent was exhausted.
He bought generic grain. He didn't sign a contract for it. It sounds like a pretty solid legal argument on the surface. But how did the Supreme Court view the concept of patent exhaustion when the product is a self-replicating organism?
Well, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously against Bowman.
Unanimously.
Yeah, their logic rested on the exact mechanics of reproduction. The court stated that while the first sale doctrine allows you to use or resell the specific item you bought, it does not give you the right to construct new copies of the patented invention.
Oh.
And in the eyes of the court, planting a patented seed to grow more seeds is the legal equivalent of manufacturing new copies of a patented invention without a license.
Here's where it gets really interesting because I understand the legal mechanics of the ruling, but conceptually, it is deeply unsettling.
It really is.
Reproduction is literally what seeds naturally do. Enclosing that capacity with a patent is like patenting the concept of a puddle forming when it rains. It's
Well-
nature just being nature. It's like buying a 3D printer that is biologically designed to print more 3D printers, but you get sued because the internal software is copyrighted. Only in this case, the printer is a living plant.
The source material refers to this exact tension as a philosophical rupture.
A philosophical rupture.
Yeah, it is a profound shift in how we categorize life. The legal system is essentially saying that the synthetic genetic sequence inserted into the seed supersedes the natural biological function of the plant.
That's wild.
The field is legally transformed into a biological factory where nature performs the labor of reproduction, but the corporation owns the output.
So the farmer goes from being a steward of living continuity to like a temporary license holder.
Operating a biological manufacturing facility on behalf of a patent holder. This raises an important question about the concept of freedom.
Yeah.
A modern farmer might own thousands of acres and sit in a technologically advanced tractor, yet possess less actual operational autonomy than their grandfather did on a fraction of the land.
Which strips away the autonomy that defined farming in the first place. You have all the tech, but you don't actually own the right to the genetic code growing in your soil.
That is the core of the rural paradox today. Technological progress arrived with massive efficiency, but operational dependency was buried in the fine print of the IP contracts.
And we have to look at the systemic consequences of this.
Right.
When natural reproduction is legally restricted on millions of individual farms, what does that mean for the broader agricultural landscape?
Well, if farmers can't save seed and they are required to buy it every single year from a handful of major corporations, the independent infrastructure rapidly consolidates or disappears entirely.
Like public university breeding programs.
Exactly. They shrink because they can't compete with the massive R&D budgets of the conglomerates. Independent regional seed companies either go out of business or get bought up to serve as distribution networks.
Which means local seed diversity. The genetic variance uniquely adapted to specific regional climates narrows drastically.
And the source outlines how this leads to a scenario they call corporate sharecropping.
That's a heavily loaded term.
It is provocative, and it's important to analyze why the text uses it. The source is clear that modern commodity farmers are not sharecroppers in the literal historical sense.
Right. The brutal racial and physical realities of post-Civil War sharecropping are distinct.
Yes, but structurally, the economic resemblance is chilling. Historical sharecropping trapped agricultural workers through endless cycles of debt, extreme dependence on the landowner for inputs, and unequal bargaining power.
And when you map that structure onto the modern system, the parallels are hard to ignore.
They really are.
The modern farmer may own the land, but they are trapped by escalating input costs, legally binding licensing restrictions, and an absolute annual technological dependence on the seed provider.
Precisely. And the genius of this modern IP-driven system is how elegantly it distributes risk.
Meaning that the risk is pushed down to the farmer?
Entirely. Think about it. If a historic drought destroys the crop, the farmer still owes the bank for the seed. If global commodity prices crash, the farmer still has to pay the technology fees. If the weeds develop biological resistance to the herbicide, which they do, the farmer has to purchase new, more expensive chemical packages.
So all the uncertainty of weather, biology, and global markets sits heavily on the shoulders of the person driving the tractor. But the profits are privatized upward to the corporations.
Exactly. The seed corporation gets paid their licensing fee, regardless of whether the harvest is a bumper crop or a total failure.
It creates a deeply asymmetric agricultural economy. So what does this all mean?
For the rest of us,
Yeah. You all need to eat. If we are systematically dismantling local seed diversity and placing the genetic future of our staple crops into a corporate monoculture, aren't we threatening our own global food sovereignty?
the source material strongly argues that we are. There is a nuanced line to walk here, though.
Okay.
Agricultural biotechnology, the ability to map genomes to understand biological traits, it has genuine scientific value.
Sure, for combating plant diseases or climate volatility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the text makes a critical distinction. The utility of the science does not automatically justify the exploitative nature of the economic architecture built around it.
Ah. So the science is a tool, but the patent law is a weapon.
That's a good way to frame it. When boardrooms far removed from the soil control the genetics of our food, the entire nation loses a layer of sovereignty. A nation becomes fundamentally dependent on proprietary genetics and corporate permission just to initiate the most basic act of survival, which is planting a crop.
It really circles back to that American blind spot we discussed at the very beginning. We culturally celebrate the farmer as an independent hero.
We do.
We praise their work ethic and their connection to the land, but we completely ignore the invisible ironclad web of contracts, debt, and intellectual property law that actually governs them.
It reveals a fascinating evolution of modern capitalism. The seed reveals how modern capitalism doesn't need to take your land if it can legally own and lease back your inputs.
You don't abolish independence, you just make independence too expensive and legally perilous to practice. It is a stunning reframing of something so basic to human existence. The next time you see a political ad or commercial featuring a noble, independent farmer in a sunlit field, I want you to look a little closer.
Look past the tractor.
Yeah, look past the amber waves of grain and think about the invisible, licensed biological system actually running the farm. Think about the user agreements buried in the soil.
And if we extrapolate this out, it leaves us with a deeply unsettling question to explore on our own.
What's that?
If the very foundation of human civilization, the genetic code of the crops we rely on to survive, can be enclosed by intellectual property law and leased back to us, what other naturally occurring, self-replicating biological processes might be next on the horizon for corporate licensing?
All right, folks, that's all for today's conversation on the American Blind Spot. Thank you so much for joining us, Jesus. And to everyone watching, don't just accept the story you were given. Question it, look deeper, and pay attention to what sits in the blind spot.
And if this conversation made you think, subscribe to the American Blind Spot for more discussions on the ideas America rarely wants to face. Until next time, ciao.